Welcome to the G360 Wealth Podcast. Today, I'm excited to be joined by Brie Williams from State Street Global Advisors. Brie is a managing director and the head of advisor solutions and wealth intelligence. Welcome, Brie.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Brie, I'd love to just kick it off for our listeners. This is going to be an exciting and intelligent conversation about family wealth, which is an interesting trend of resources that wealth advisory firms are offering to their clients. But I'd like to just start at the most basic levels. Who are you and what do you do for State Street? What
Always
is wealth
a good
intelligence?
question. Yeah, it's very fancy. So, in a really nutshell, my job is about helping people navigate financial complexity with a little more clarity and a lot of less noise. So, what does that look like day to day? I mean, definitely no 2 weeks look the same. Most of my time really sits at the intersection of listening, translating, and problem solving. So there are days where I'm really deep in the research itself. That's the wealth intelligence element of the title you referenced. And that really is about looking deeply at how individual investors, institutions, and retirement savers are thinking and behaving, and really what's changing underneath all of that. There are other days where I'm sitting with leadership teams or financial advisors like yourself and helping them translate the insights that we have into real discussions, real conversations, and real outcomes for the individuals and families that they serve. And then, of course, there's the time and responsibility I have to mentor our rising talent, including my own teams, shaping the future research agenda that we support, and honestly, just learning. The questions that investors are asking, they just continue to evolve. I mean, everything's changing all around us, and money is a dynamic topic, as are families. So I would say that's what my typical week should look like. There's probably some planes, trains, and automobiles thrown in there because although I live in Boston, I'm very rarely there. I'm out on the West Coast today talking to you.
So not only does, neither week look the same, but probably hour to hour is very different.
Yes.
But so maybe we could take a step back and talk about your journey personally. How does one start gathering research on wealthy families, wealth dynamics? I mean, this is a very nuanced topic where I'm sure you have a lot of experience and really exciting conversations and outputs. How did you get to this part of your career?
So definitely not a straight line, and really challenging to, if you were to ask me when I first punched out of college, what would I be doing? It would not have been this response. I'm thrilled with where I'm at. Don't get me wrong, but it's not anything that I saw in the crystal ball. I mean, to really put a period on that, I was studying to do broadcast journalism and then pivoted into advertising, fell in love with it, and spent a good 12 years in that career before moving over to financial services. So when it came to the research element, the common thread between those mediums is behavior. And there's a reason we do what we do, why we do what we do. But the underlying insight behind, well, why did you say yes or no to that? Or what made you decide to talk to your children about wealth? There's always that human component that's motivating you to take action or not take action. And we like to say the truth lives in the middle. So there's perception's reality, but what's in between that is usually the levers we can all move to get a little more clarity, shut down all the noise that's around us to gain the self-awareness that we need to improve decisions. So that curiosity and that intersection of why we do what we do, the behavior and the attitudes, is really what and pushed me into this seat because it's fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, what an incredible journey to get where you are. And I think your unique background probably makes you, so widely recognized in your skill set and your offering. I think maybe where we kick off the conversation is, in a prior career, I heard a client say something that I think will really resonate with you that I've mentioned to you before. And that is, how do I protect my children from ruining my money and my money from ruining my children? And this topic of family wealth conversations and family dynamics, I think has really grown more prominent as wealth has increased. Families have garnered more complexity. And I think at the end of the day, for folks who are listening to this, we work with a lot of business owners or a lot of executives who are first generation wealth creators. And one of their greatest fears is they've worked so hard to accumulate their wealth. How do they enjoy it responsibly in a sense, right? How do they grow happy and healthy families? What are the trends you're seeing amongst wealthy families and how they want to not only manage their wealth, right? Asset allocation, dividend yield, trust structure,
The technical.
but I think what's more important is raising children and grandchildren that they're proud of. I don't think anybody sets out to uh, have a lot of family issues, and I think by being proactive is where you can really help cultivate those happy, healthy family members, community members, and really increase that productive lineage.
What you said is 100% accurate. Best advice helps families live well, not just invest well. And when you think about money problems, which exist whether you're talking one on one to an individual or a family, they're part of the equation, but it's not about the math, it's about the dynamics. So the trends that we see or themes are really tied to the fact that money and family are two of the most emotional topics in the world. So now you're going to put those two together, and complexity shows up pretty quickly. So the significant theme I see when you look at it through that lens and what you just described as the desire or the aspiration families have, I think of that as roots and wings. So families want to give their children, they want to give their grandchildren a very strong foundation to work from. What's in that foundation? Education, opportunity, financial stability. And they don't want to take away their motivation, that individual, that child's purpose as they grow into adulthood and or their independence. So that tension's going to show up everywhere. So the questions you outlined, how much do I share? When do I help? How do I talk about wealth without letting it define someone's identity or direction? Really important questions to work through. And no answer is the same for each family. The other theme that goes with this hand in hand is more than ever, our families are navigating multiple generations at once. So we want to have this inclusive conversation about money and its purpose. Then you start bringing in, different demographics, which is part of the equation. But just because we're a family doesn't mean those generations have the same expectations, nor the same values. And then, depending on where they are on the spectrum of life, different financial experiences. And all of those factors influence the very same decision you're asking the family to come together on. So they're going to bring that perspective. They're going to bring their reality to the table. And that's a lot to work through on top of the wealth creators thinking through how much to share, when do I help, and talk about wealth in this manner. So that makes these conversations even harder, especially if there's no shared language for talking about money across those differences. So what we see is families that do this really well are talking about money more openly. What does that mean? It means they're not treating money like a secret. They're not treating money like a scoreboard. They're using it as a tool for learning that then provides also the opportunity to look at money as a tool for developing responsibility, which leads to more prudent stewardship of money over time. If I may, I actually am curious for you, ask a question back, like this idea of roots and wings. I'm sure that shows up in your work, but how does that present itself with the families you're supporting?
Yeah, I know. As you were talking about these themes that are going on, I'm thinking more of the word that I think that comes up is sudden, right? There's a lot of sudden wealth. And you talk about language and communication. I think that a lot of families come to us after the fact, or we meet them after the fact, where they've had their liquidity event, we've planned around it, but then we say something to them, it kind of in line with roots and wings, but we're going to spend tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars working with your CPA, your estate attorney, your exit attorney, and we're going to spend all this money to talk about transferring your assets. And has anybody ever asked you to transfer your values? And when we ask for that, the answer is a resounding no. I haven't even thought of that. How do I memorialize my family creed, or what our ethos is and how I got here? And I think that is a major lacking offering, right? Most wealthy families, they have a trusted CPA, they have a trusted attorney, and a trusted financial advisor. the really great teams work together and cohesively, the even better teams engage somebody like you or some family practice to help them define those roots and wings or the family ethos. And right now, I think one emotion that comes up a lot with families who are going through liquidity events right after excitement is probably fear. I talked to a family last week and they made a comment to me. It wasn't about asset allocation. It wasn't about the returns. It was, I have four daughters that are under four that all have more than $4 million. And, that's, kind of a champagne problem. But, you know, that's what families are worried about and making sure that those children under four grow up and to be happy, healthy, productive members of society and how to navigate that. We often talk about, from our team's vantage point is the dimmer switch, right? You don't want to turn the lights all the way on. Maybe 12th or 13th birthday isn't a really an appropriate time to be breaking out the brokerage statements. But building better money habits is something we talk about all the time from a very young age. Appreciating money, appreciating the value of a dollar, I think is really, really critical. And something that we've learned to integrate, and that's our name, Generation Capital Advisors, is working with that multi-generational family, not to just simply transfer that wealth, but to do it in a really intelligent manner that cultivates happy, healthy families. And integrating, I think, charitable is really, really important.
Hmm. Yeah, that's often a common value is giving back or paying it forward in some fashion, and can be a really good space for experiential learning. But you hit the nail on the head. You're not helping just manage the wealth. You're helping a family manage the meaning, the motivation, and the identity. And most of us, unless being asked those questions of passing on the values and providing money experiences in a safe space, haven't really put that down on paper or put it into a plan that they can enact.
So, in your experience, being one of the world's leading experts in these topics, where should a family start? If you're listening to this and you own a business and you're concerned about these things, where does one normally start?
So, and what I think helps first is if they just zoom out. So, the one of the biggest challenges that we observe around the world is more money, more problems, right? So, you mentioned the champagne problem, very true. But whatever the wealth situation is within a family, it tends to magnify what already exists in that family. So, if communication is strong within the family, money can support that, and there's a stronger foundation to work from. If money is in an environment that communication is more strained, then money often becomes a stress point, which is a more challenging place to begin from. On top of the communication element, you've already listed a lot of decisions to be thought through. So there's decision fatigue. So more options. You mentioned a larger team, so more professionals, which help you navigate this space well, and having structure, but more structure than you probably thought you needed. If you can help channel that productively, you can get to a better place of confidence. If you mentioned the word fear, often it's just, I don't know what I don't know, which is okay. But if you live in that space of hesitation, and which can create anxiety or even paralysis, because it's your money, right? And it's your family, and you don't want to make the wrong move. So getting to a space of, I do want to do this is the best place to start. So how do within our family environment, when we think about money communication and money experiences, begin there? And let's break it down into, I call them digestible bites, because they need to be small enough tasks that make progress along the way. So for those that are motivated like myself by checking something off, moving on to the next thing, I can see the progress and the family can celebrate small wins because they're just as important as the bigger goal that those smaller tasks are helping you work towards. And we forget often to celebrate the progress along the way. It's just as powerful. And the other challenge when you think about the communication, the checklist of things to go through is who's doing what? Role clarity within the family. So parents wonder, well, where does the support end and the control begin? And children, as they move into adulthood, or if it's already adult children, they're wondering, well, how do I accept help if I'm willing to accept it? Because I don't want to lose my own autonomy. And very few families want money to be this central storyline about their relationship, but it can quietly drift there if it's not addressed. So it's less about the struggle with the technical elements, and it's more about the human side, the expectations, the emotions, the unspoken assumptions. So clarity on what would you like to share, and what would you like to see along the way, roles and responsibilities that can help you identify and begin to talk through and ultimately deploy, is a great place to begin, with the mindset of, let's break it down into smaller digestible bites so we're making progress. And you know what? If something's not going in the right direction, we can optimize, because it's going to not be perfect. And it's a marathon, not a sprint. So you mentioned coming to you after the trigger event, or in this case, a transfer of assets have happened. It's better late than never, but it's also never too late to try and start the family foundation of what does money mean to us, and how do we utilize it as a tool to create capability.
That's really powerful. That's a line that I may plagiarize from you.
Right ahead.
So one thing that we tend to see a lot is kind of the integration and the intersection of where these conversations happen is typically when they're going through the estate planning process. Something is happening when a client's life, whether he or she is getting ready to sell the business and they're doing valuation discounts or setting up trusts, trying to capitalize on their estate exemption, picking trustees, thinking about those key roles. What is something that somebody who's going through in that event can execute on? Are there books they should read? Should they be reaching out to their team? What's the best way to actually take what you're saying and put some structure around it and start learning? And I'll preface that by saying one thing that I hear a lot, which actually drives me crazy, to be honest, is, well, what are your other clients doing? And I always tell folks, you're so different from our other clients. Everybody's different. No family scheme is the same. Don't worry about what our other clients do. We can help you with techniques and strategies that our other clients are doing, but focus on what you want. This isn't a copy and paste somebody else's family.
No, but what they're asking about are social norms. And we learn a lot from social norms, what to do or not to do based on what we envision as possible, or what our crystal ball we believe should look like as we make progress. So I think your answer is a smart one, in the fact that there are some commonalities, but not lift out and pop into your life translations, because the nuances of family dynamics are very unique, and their goals and objectives are intensely personal to where they are on the journey and what they hope to achieve, to create that capable moment of money as a deploying vehicle to make it all possible. So I think, broadly speaking, the real opportunity is to shift the thinking about how families view the role of wealth, from something that, simply provides a resource, to thinking about money as something that can actively shape behavior, confidence, and decision making over time. And that's where the role that you play and your team comes into the equation. A trusted advisor is essential to helping create space for better conversations. You need the technical element of managing the assets and all the components that go with that. But again, we said up front, family is emotional, money is emotional, and this is about our behavior and our actions. So we have to have a space to have conversations that allow for us to be human beings. What that does is it just slows it down a bit, right? Let's take a beat, even though this just happened, or there's some deadlines associated with the estate plan, which is highly intricate. You want to help these families ask the right questions, or just start asking questions in general, both on the technical side, but also on the human element, the behavior. The EQ is just as critical as the IQ. They'll navigate that moment of transition then from a place of being informed and exploring to get more information, which will move them away from this place of anxiety, which is natural, and out of fear or pressure, which can push us to make decisions too quickly or maybe the wrong choice for the wrong reasons. Knowledge is power. It's not about all the information you possible before you make a decision. That's really not what I'm saying at all, but enough information that you feel comfortable, confident. So when you look back, you don't have a regret. So that's the role with you and your team, the trusted advisor. But I think the other side of the equation that's the hardest is the one that lives at home. So wealth is effective when it's experienced, not just explained. And that's because we all learn differently. I myself am an experiential learner. And if I don't apply what I just read in these 5 chapters that or have a real time application to put that knowledge towards, it tends to go away. So I want to apply the knowledge to continue to grow and be more effective in that subject matter or the task at hand. Same thing with children. So we all have a role to play. Literally, we're role models with how we use money. And that's education through experience. And they're watching you, your children, your grandchildren. They're watching you with how you model money. How is it handled in the family day to day? How are trade-offs being made? If there's a setback, how is that handled? Are you treating money as a tool for security and impact, or are you treating it differently where it's something you tend to avoid or fight about? All can be very real. And again, regardless of what the answer is, it doesn't mean that's your state forever. But recognizing how you're modeling behavior and knowing that your children and grandchildren are watching, that's what I mean by education and experiential element lives at home can be really tough. But when you start with this element of let's be inclusive and let's talk about money appropriately for however old the children and the grandchildren are, and find safe spaces or safe learning opportunities for them to make small money mistakes because they have the security net, right? But for money's virtual today. It's not like there's no more dollar bills in your wallet. You can't buy that candy or whatever the toy is that you want. It's harder, I think. But sometimes going back to, well, what are the tangible lessons we can impart? Maybe that's through the idea you talked about, the charitable element. Or perhaps it's letting them participate in some real choices, such as, okay, we're going to take $40 to the grocery store and buy the dinner tonight, which is real-time trade-offs, but also teaching them how much things cost. Great lessons that can be learned with very low effort and pretty easy to do because you're not talking about your balance sheet. You're talking about money as a means to achieve that goal that day or that task. So the everyday modeling can go a long way because in the exercise of working with the trusted advisor, the broader team, the estate plan, it's all the work that happens before the money changes hands. So you want that wealth to be less about control and protection and more about building capability, creating confidence, and ultimately long-term well-being. Because those families are trying to live well on that journey, which is generational. So it's exceptionally a long journey.
Yeah. So what you're saying is that communication is highly important, and perhaps the kind of old school method of hey, you'll find out what's there when I'm gone is probably not the best
Yeah.
approach in some cases.
No, those scenes in the movies where everyone gathers in the lawyer's office to find out, do not recommend that. I think that, that can create a world of problems. And especially, I mean, it is your money. It's your choices. It's not about taking the power and the autonomy away from the wealth creator. But it is, if you have a goal for transferring the wealth, recognize it's not just transfer of assets. It is that transfer of values that you said earlier. And if you have a legacy in mind of that roots and wings and enabling possibility through giving a leg up while you're still here and after you've gone, then there's a lot of work to be done. And start small and think about how that communication element, that fabric needs to evolve in your family to get there. And everyone needs to kind of push back some of the emotion that will come along the way because there's so many decisions. So if the wealth creators, the matriarch, patriarch of the family, let's call them the grandparents in this case, want to talk about, hey, we're buying a family plot in the cemetery and it's going to cover these generations. Your immediate response as a grandchild or an in-law in the family is like, oh, this is a horrible conversation. It means you're not here. I don't want to talk about this. But you have to, like, there's a reason they're including me in this conversation. Let me listen and see how I can play a role in helping this part of their legacy come to life.
Yeah, I think one thing that we notice is with many of our clients who are going through these types of events and challenges that come up is the internet, right? Brie's selling her company, and those transactions are publicly posted. Oh, the family business is being sold for $100 million, and I think one of the trends that I'm interested to see what your trends are. One thing that we see with our clients is when we go through their financial plan and they see the end value, right? Most of our clients typically don't change their lives significantly drastically from what they were living before to the end of the event because they are first generation wealth creators and have built these portfolios that the compounding effect once these liquidity events become monetized and then invested, we're seeing a lot of clients being, whoa, I don't want my grandchildren to have 25 or $30 million. And what we say is, all right, let's take a step back and let's document and articulate what are your actual goals with your wealth. And I think that is really helpful to say, well, I've never even really thought about that. And what we like to do is use Fidelity Charitable as a tool, especially like a gift to give is a great strategy where you can give your children and grandchildren an allocation. And at Thanksgiving time, talk about, well, why did you use the family DAF to go donate to XYZ charity, increase their critical thinking skills, and come together over something that has community to it. But I'm curious from your end, you work with clients across the country. What are the
Mhm.
trends that you're seeing?
So charitable giving is definitely up there. And there's also no shortage of different types of vehicles structurally that can help you think through transfer of assets, whether that's through a lens of tax motivation purposes. So you're doing this in a tax smart way, but also in a way that doesn't overwhelm the next generation and the money has purpose without handcuffs is I think what you're asking me about. And I think again that's where the roots and wings really comes to life because families can provide the opportunity and the opportunity lives within education, guidance, and a safety net without removing that child's expectation of, okay, you as a human being are going to contribute, ultimately work in some fashion and build a life of your own. And again, it goes back to what is the vision of that wealth creator, no matter how sizable the estate may be, and what would you like to pass on within the family? If you have a philanthropic inclination, let's put a plan together for what that looks like. Let's also communicate that plan because knowledge, again, is power here. And what your children, grandchildren, spouses, partners know is going to put them in a better position to be prudent stewards of the assets coming their way, but also learn to appreciate the decisions you're making, whether they agree with it or not, because it's a chance to take it in, process it, and understand why you are doing what you're doing, because it is ultimately your legacy. But I think what goes to the heart of the matter is first understanding what the vision is for legacy for that family. And if it's tied to a liquidity event, like you just talked about, of selling a business, and these numbers are really quite large, it is working through that. So you don't see what you view in the headlines of money being just shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations, which is that proverb where first generation creates it, second generation starts to spend it down, may contribute to continuing to grow it. By the time it gets to the third generation, they spend all the way through it, and there's not as much as there could have been if the second generation had done more of their part on continuing to nurture that legacy. And that's the mistake you make when there isn't an open conversation. So I think a bigger shift that we see is families moving away from this one very large conversation and creating this ongoing dialogue that evolves with age and with life stage. Because early on, the work is about effort, responsibility, and what the money is actually for. And that creates this practical framework, which begins to separate support from entitlement. And I think that's a really important framework to establish, because you're going to adopt inclusivity through communication and roles, as well as experiential learning. But you're also adopting inclusivity because you're sharing the why behind your choices, which you can't do after you've gone.
Yeah, I mean, uh, the days I think you highlighted of the attorney reading the will, putting the cassette tape in, and grandma and grandpa are on the TV are non-existent. When we talk about, we always like to talk about clients, about capitalizing opportunity, focusing on simplification. It sounds like a lot of this is also somewhat common sense, right? Like, let's, rather than be very sudden, it's, be a little more deliberate. Think about how your children, your family, and maybe your broader family at a whole are interacting with this, and notice things, communicate. What are the things that you're seeing in your function as far as like the greatest challenges, right? There's so many opportunities. What are the challenges that these families are going to face as they kind of go through this process? Because I can't imagine it's a straight line, you
No,
know?
definitely not. It's not. And I would love to meet the family that walked that straight line, because family families are dynamic, wealth is dynamic. And even with the best laid plans, let's not just set wealth transfer aside for a second, but even with the best wealth laid plans, there will be curveballs in life. There will be changes in life. And those are things that are beyond your control. But what is in your control is having some clarity on your vision and putting a roadmap together to help you stay on track to achieve that vision, and being willing to ebb and flow by recognizing we have the clarity, which that has not changed my vision today. But, maybe based on the fact that, I lose my partner early on in life, that probably does have an impact on my legacy component of my plan. Uh, and then how I choose to move forward from there. So those curveball moments don't always have to be that dramatic, but there are moments like that that can change the trajectory. So a lot of the good work that we see is focusing on translating the good intention into real conversations. So to make this extremely practical, the how do you do that? It's about talking through to understand if family has the desire to give during life rather than only at inheritance. If that's a yes, then you have some next steps that fall out of that. If that's a no, then that comes off the table for now. That may change 10 years from down the road. So you want to keep asking and exploring and allowing for that to come back on the table if your motivations and desires change. Second area you mentioned, again, the roots and wings that we were talking about. So the question here for families to ask and to work through is, well, how do we create learning moments for the next generation without creating dependency? Because we don't want to do that. And if that's the clarity that they're looking to have, then we have to unpack that. And based on the children and the grandchildren and the age of those, what's the plan for those under age 10 versus those that are teenagers versus those that are moving into adulting right out of school versus the 40-year-olds? There are all different elements where learning moments, because we don't stop learning. We continue to learn as we go. I think the third element is avoidance. This topic, wealth transfer, is ultimately about death. And as human beings, we are not motivated to talk about that. We will do everything else but discuss that. So, how do you help move them from avoidance, which can create tension, but also procrastination, which means I'm not making progress, towards clarity and shared understanding?
Yeah, so it's always fun gathering around for your cup of coffee and talking about planning a funeral. Those are really the great conversations of life, but they're the ones that have to, there's everybody has different emotions when it comes to planning for this, but the conversations, the important ones, are the ones that need to happen. When we think about, like, what are some practical things our listeners should be doing? Are there any favorite books or podcasts? Like, what's out there in this topic that's probably, very foreign to a lot of folks? I know that, from our end, there's, books and consulting firms that are popping up left and right.
Sure.
What's your favorite method of digesting this commentary?
So again, everyone learns differently. And, I think you need to allow for people to explore wealth of educational resources that let them learn on their terms. For some, they may love podcasts. And like that's how they commute to work every day is they pick one and they listen to it and they glean some insights from it and may put some action forward as a result. Others like to read books. I'm in that camp. I love books. I have a stack that's getting quite tall in my office, not enough time in the day. So there's actually two books that I want to share that I think are really helpful, but they're helpful for two different reasons. One is going to address the EQ, the emotional quotient side of this equation, because we are talking about family and we are talking about money, two emotional topics in the world. But setting the financial technical element aside for the moment, you have to know how to create a language and understand the language of others. Because again, we're not all necessarily speaking in the same way and or motivated in the same fashion. But in the context of money, it helps if you are more precise around emotional awareness. So to give yourself as a family a shared vocabulary, because that's what sits underneath the financial decisions, because we're not necessarily naming them. We did on this podcast, as we talked about, no one wants to talk about planning a funeral over the morning coffee. But, if you want to say and what that funeral looks like, you need to talk about it with your family while you're still here and not just leave it to a piece of paper. So when you have that language, you're in a better position as both an individual and a family to distinguish between things like fear, what's causing uncertainty, where we have money guilt, and if there's any comparisons happening, which usually is the case. And that naturally slows the conversation and decision making down. So giving the clarity there lets you be thoughtful and lets you listen. So all voices matter. Don't have to agree with them, but you do need to hear the perspective, the thoughts, the concerns, the aspirations, the questions from everyone involved. And that will help you have a clearer path forward as long as you're willing to hear it. After that, that clarity then lets you be more sensitive on your terms around topics like spending, giving, expectations. So the book Atlas of the Heart by Brené Brown does a beautiful job of that. I think it's a fun read. It's a little thick, I'm going to be honest. You can listen to it if you want to listen to the book on audio, if you don't want to flip the pages. And there's lots of interviews with her where she's talking about this book. So if you just want a quick hit to say, do I want to dive deeper here? I would encourage that as well. But I think, for anyone that is in high school and older, this is a really good book to read. It's just going to give you a better handle on the EQ and understand the language better. It's like this roadmap for the heart, which is why she calls it Atlas of the Heart. But it's a beautiful book. The other one is a little more structural. This is about the business of family. That's the title. And it's How to Stay Rich for Generations. So Linda Taylor Davis is the author. She's a former CEO in our business. And it's described by many as a very practical or structural resource. But what stands out to me in this book is it blends that EQ I was talking about with decision discipline, which is what we've been talking a lot about in this conversation. So it helps families put language together with process and expectations around things that are going to be emotionally charged: roles, responsibilities, legacy. And it treats values and communication and governance as this interconnected, not separate force. And I think that allows a family to move forward and out of assumption, which is a space a lot of us tend to sit within, to shared understanding, which is where we're beginning to make progress against that vision for legacy that you have before the tensions surface. So when you take those two types of resources together, and again, you can listen to that book. Linda used to have a podcast. I don't know if it's still active today, but she will take a hyper topic and it's an interesting one to listen to. But it reinforces two important things. Healthy families need smart financial planning, but they also need the emotional literacy with that intentional structure. So they work side by side with someone like yourself and your team, Sam, but also side by side as a family unit with their partner, their grandparents, the grandchildren, the extended family, depending on how inclusive you want to be. But you need to have the planning element structurally, coupled with the emotional literacy, because that's going to create an intentional path forward.
I think that's a great place to wrap up our conversation on being intentional, right? This isn't something that most of our listeners are going to have great expertise in, but they can be intentional about asking for help, surrounding themselves with the right people, and starting. Right? It's never too late to start and think about, what are your concerns. And I think this episode will resonate with a lot of our listeners, a lot of our clients. Returns are supremely important, but I think if you polled most of our clients, would you rather have, you know, amazing returns or an amazing family? I think most people would, probably pick having the amazing family. You know, the really smart ones will pick both.
I think they
I,
can have their cake and eat it too. I mean, because money's never just about money. I mean, it reflects values, relationships, and choices. And if you allow yourself to evolve over time, which is part of the journey, and work with someone like yourself, which has a wealth of resources to help them navigate that, then you can take away the tension and you can support the life, that great family, that amazing family you're talking about, actually get built.
well, as we end every show, the floor is yours. What are you most excited about? What's going on in Bree's world at State Street? Is there anything you want to share with our listeners that you're working on or really excited or passionate about?
Sure. So there's no shortage of things that we're exploring, and we're all driven by curiosity. I like to describe our team as the bunch of 2 and 3-year-olds in your life that are always asking you, well, why? Why? Because the answer you're providing is never enough. We want to really understand. Related to this topic at hand, we've done some recent work on understanding the motivations, both from the giver's point of view, so the wealth creator transferring assets to family or charity or both, and from the recipient's point of view, those that are receiving those assets, and looking for that truth in the middle against a phenomenon that largely has lived in philanthropic circles alone, this giving while living. We touched on that a little bit through our conversation, but I think it's important to understand from both sides, the receiver and the giver, what are their motivations? What are their expectations? What's their vision? What are the challenges and concerns they have? Because it creates more clarity on how we as an industry can better support and enable that within the family structure and take it less from an institutional point of view and more from an enablement standpoint of the capability that money as a tool can provide.
Well, Bree, thank you so much for this intelligent conversation. I'm really excited about the work that you're doing at State Street. And if our listeners uh, want to reach out to you or schedule some time, they can reach out to me. I can happy to share resources. If you listen to this and you want to get more information from Bree, please reach out. I know we had a little bit of construction noise in the background,
Totally my fault.
but that's because we're building great foundations here. So just in line with the theme. But thank you very much. I'm excited to see the work you produce. It's no surprise why you're so well regarded and have won so many industry awards. So thank you very much for your time, and I hope everybody has a great day.
Thanks for listening to the G360 Wealth Podcast. If today's episode gave you something to think about or act on, share it with someone who might need it. Don't forget to hit subscribe so you're always in the loop. If you want to learn more about how we help families like yours simplify and grow their wealth, visit us at generationcapitaladvisors.com. Until next time, take care and keep building. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guests and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Generation Capital Advisors. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning. Investment advice offered through Integrated Partners, doing business as Generation Capital Advisors, a registered investment advisor. The information in this material is for general information only and is not intended to provide specific advice or recommendation for any individual. Integrated Partners does not provide legal, tax, or mortgage advice or services. Please consult your legal or tax advisor regarding your specific situation. All investing involves risk, including loss of principal. No strategy assures success or protects against loss.